Good evening, everyone. I'm David Grimes. I represent South Central Nebraska on the Nebraska Farm Bureau Board. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. This is the District 33 Legislative Forum. I want to welcome everybody and thank everybody who came to listen and participate. And most of all, I want to thank the four candidates for caring enough about their community and the people in their district to seek to serve us. Nebraska's economic foundation and its largest industry is agriculture. Nearly 1 out of every 4 Nebraska jobs is generated by agriculture. The election of our next leaders is one of the most important decisions Nebraska voters will make. It will impact the prosperity of our state over the next 4 to 8 years. Our number one goal this evening is to provide the opportunity for our members and the public at large to hear from the candidates for the legislature and how they respond to questions that impact both agriculture and rural Nebraska. Nebraska Farm Bureau is a grassroots, statewide farm and ranch organization that represents more than 55,000 member families across Nebraska. We're dedicated to supporting farm and ranch families and working for the benefit of all Nebraskans through a wide variety of educational, service, and advocacy efforts. Before I turn it over to our moderator, I'd like to thank again each of you for participating, the candidates, and for those in the audience participating as well. Following the forum tonight, we'll be hosting a reception where you'll have the opportunity to visit one-on-one with each of the candidates, and I think there's some cookies still left. At this time, I'd like to introduce Steve White from Channel 13, and he will be our moderator tonight for our forum. Thank you, Steve.
Well, good evening, and thank you all for being with us on this rainy evening, and we could certainly use some moisture around here. My name is Steve White from NTV News. Tonight I will serve as moderator for the District 33 Legislative Candidate Forum. Before we start the forum, we've got a few instructions for the rules of the forum. We do ask that audience members refrain from cheering or applause during the event. Any disruptions will take time away from the candidates, and we would like to have as much time as we can to get to as many questions as possible. We will take questions from the audience this evening, so you will need to write your question on a note card, raise your note card in the air, and one of our volunteers will bring your question up to the screener's table. If you need a note card, please raise your hand and a volunteer will bring you a blank note card. The rules for this structured forum are that each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement and introduction. Following the opening statements, a question and answer segment will begin where I will ask questions that you have submitted, and each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to the question. There will be no time allowed for rebuttal. Following the Q&A portion, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing comments. The order of the candidates was selected by random drawing moments ago. The candidates include candidate number 1, Michelle Smith; candidate number 2, Dan Lanowski; candidate number 3, Paul Hamelink; and candidate number 4, Joshua Frederick. We begin this evening with Michelle Smith for an opening statement. 2 minutes commencing now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming. It's a pleasure to see so many faces here to support all of us and hear about the issues. I'm running for state legislature because the people of District 33 need a common sense, local voice to address the issues facing all of us. And I think all of us in this room know that we have a lot of issues that need solved right now. I was born and raised in Hastings. I raised my son here. I'm a business owner in Hastings. I'm a mental health therapist. That's my reason for running for state legislature. Prior to the pandemic, I could work hard. There was never enough of us therapists in rural Nebraska, but we could work hard to meet the needs of our community. Since the pandemic, that's not the case anymore. I grew up with values of hard work, and I've never lived in a time where my hard work was not enough. And that's not acceptable. The people of District 33 deserve better. The people of Nebraska deserve better. The 2 million Nebraskans deserve health care. They deserve housing. They deserve people to work for the companies in the businesses that they own. On that note, I would be honored to serve as the next state senator of District 33.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Candidate number 2, Dan Lanowski.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Especially thank you to your young people who are getting involved with the political process. So I have a large family. I come from a family of 7 people. My wife and I have 5 kids. We have 6 grandkids and 2 more on the way. So we've been blessed in that way. I'm very pro-life, pro-education. I've been a high school teacher for the last 35 years. I retired last May. I've been in the Army National Guard for 36 years. So I've been in the foxhole. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to Kuwait. I've been in a war zone. I know what that fight looks like. A few summers back, I served in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon and at National Guard Bureau. I've helped Nebraska with with tornadoes and floods, and I helped with Hurricane Katrina down in Louisiana. So I've done a lot of service for different people. I want to be our next senator because I think we need to make sure we remain fiscally responsible. As a high school teacher, I need to make sure that woke doesn't come to our schools. We need to keep our conservative values, morals, and ethics just the way we have. I've been at Adams Central for the last 29 years. I know what right looks like. I know what good schools look like. As I talk to these young people, and they're in the FFA program, there's nothing more valuable than programs like that in Nebraska. I want to make sure we continue that kind of effort. I want to make sure that our education process remains with vigorous standards and that we keep our kids going in the right direction. As a military, I can tell you right now, our National Guard, our Army, and our services, they are low in numbers, and we have to do things. We have to somehow figure out how to keep our National Guard near 100%. With that, I can see that my time is up, and so thank you.
And candidate number 3, Paul Hamelink.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out on a rainy night. I'm Paul Hamelink. I'm a former city council president from Hastings and business owner there. I also have locations in Norfolk and beyond. I think the question that everybody wants answered tonight is, if we send you to Lincoln, what are you going to do? How do you foretell the future about what somebody's going to do? There's a saying that talk is cheap. Probably everybody in this room has said we need to lower taxes. Everybody in this room says we need to increase our economy. Everybody in this room agrees we need to control government spending. I think you can see what will happen if I go to Lincoln by looking at what I've been doing for the last 4 to 8 years. And my involvements are not something that I can just talk about, but I can show you the results. And so as we worked in the city council, we cut spending. We were able to work with the utilities that we have. And I know there's been utility issues out here in this area with combining districts, and saving $500,000 a year in just executive salaries. I've done economic development issues. Our airport 8 years ago was the only airport in Nebraska run by the city dump. Today, it is the airport of the year, just named a couple of months ago. I've spent this last 2 weeks working on housing issues as chair of the Policies and Issues Commission for the Nebraska Commission on Housing and Homelessness. I've been lobbying centers, protecting our housing. We have a critical housing shortage. I've spent over 10 hours this week, more than 20 hours last week, training people across America in the housing industry. When I go to Lincoln, I go with the support of our Republican leaders, people like Mike Flood, who is endorsing our campaign, to make sure that we get results when we go there. And I've got the track record to prove it. Thank you.
And candidate number 4, Joshua Frederick.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see a lot of good faces, a lot of young faces. I'm also a little young, if you haven't guessed. I'm about half the age of everybody running. Joshua Frederick, running for District 33. I'm a U.S. Army vet. I fought the Biden administration when they pushed the COVID shot. You know, as a Christ follower and a Christian, I said no to a shot made with aborted fetal lines and tissues. I was persecuted for my First Amendment rights and my religious convictions, and they unlawfully discharged me from the Army. So they threatened me with prison time. They threatened to take my pay, my rank, but I fought that. I was able to successfully drop most of the charges that I was facing while I was a service member. A lot of people felt the same sting of government tyranny during the pandemic, whether that's closing the doors of churches or shutting down health clinics for the sake of COVID readiness, whatever the case may be. A lot of unlawful things happened. So one of the reasons I'm running is to push for the Nebraska Bill of Rights to get a medical freedom act that would ensure people could refuse any medical service they desire. There's going to be talks about taxes tonight, health care. I want to make it very clear. I'm the most pro-life candidate on stage. Life begins at conception. God knows each and every children. They're fearfully and wonderfully made at the beginning. Fertilization, whatever you want to call it, it's at the beginning. They deserve to be protected. Our United States Constitution protects life. Our state Constitution protects life. So I'm interested in protecting life. One of the hot topics will be taxes. I think before we get to taxes, it's how do we defend life? And then we can talk about compromise on taxes. But I'd like to see property tax go away. I think a lot of people are in favor of that. It's an immoral, feudalist system that maintains us renting from the state government. And we never own our property. It can be seized after 3 years if you don't pay it. I'd like to see it go away. So I look forward to the questions, and let's have a good discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, candidates. Just a reminder for those in the audience, if you have a question, you can hold your hand in the air, and somebody will come and pick these up. A couple of other reminders. This debate, or not debate, it's a forum, is streaming live right now at Nebraska.tv. It's streaming on the NTV News Facebook page. So if you've got other folks, I now give you permission to pull out your phone and text them and say, hey, tune in and watch. This is great stuff going on. You need to know about your candidates. This is your opportunity. NTV News on Facebook and the NTV News website, streaming live right now. And the candidates will each get 90 seconds as we go through a variety of questions, and we're going to be rotating. So question number one will go to Dan Lanowski, and we're going to go to the question that probably a lot of people in this room have thought about and has already been mentioned here. What is your opinion on our current tax structure, and what changes would you advocate for if elected? What's your opinion on our current tax structure, and what changes would you advocate for? Starting with Dan Lanowski.
Well, right now we are the 7th highest taxed state in the nation with property taxes, and we need some sort of tax reform. So there's been a tax out there called the consumption tax or the EPIC tax, and it would take us to $0 property tax. And it's a very comprehensive plan, and there's a lot of debate going on with that right now. And as well, Governor Pillen has suggested an additional sales tax rather than the consumption tax, and so there's a lot of debate going on. What I know is we need tax reform for our property taxes. We need to bring our property taxes down, if not property tax at 0. How do we do that is the million-dollar question, or probably the $30 million question. So we've got to keep working on that. I am for tax reform, especially with property taxes, and we have got to figure out how to solve that. If the EPIC tax, if we have problems getting the EPIC tax in, I still plan to piecemeal parts of that as we go on and to ensure that we get some property tax relief.
All right, same question now goes to Paul Hamelink on taxes.
Thank you. We need tax reform. I believe in a balanced approach. We talk often about a three-legged stool: property tax, income tax, and some sort of consumption or sales tax. We have those. The problem is in Nebraska, unlike other states, we don't have large natural resources. We don't have large tourism. We don't have those kinds of things that give us revenues that can offset some of these issues. We are overburdened. That leg of property tax has gotten too long, and it burdens our most important industry, agriculture. And so we have to make it more balanced. So quickly, a couple of things that we can do. Number one, we need to look at how we fund schools. The biggest issue for property taxes is that it funds our schools. Unfortunately, the state bought into a program called TIOSA. That is the Tax Equalization and Education Opportunity Act. Got passed back in 1990. It's not fair. It greatly favors our urban districts. There's some 180 rural school districts who don't get $1 from TIOSA. And millions go to our urban areas. So we've got to look at that. We have to look at ways of limiting, because the two issues are assessments keep going up, and we shouldn't see windfalls go to counties and school districts just because assessments go up. So we have to look at how we do those assessments and our mill rates.
And Joshua Frederick on taxes.
Yeah, you've already heard it. I'm in favor of the EPIC option. We absolutely must eliminate property, income, inheritance, corporate, and sales tax and replace it with a flat consumption tax. This consumption tax would, help families, help farmers. It would be a economically viable system that scales with the economical viability of farmers, of families, you name it. Every single person, you pay it based on your ability to purchase new goods or services. That's what the consumption tax is proposed. Right now, we have skyrocketing tax assessments on property. We have inflation, no end in sight to fund endless wars by a radical liberal administration. We can talk about cutting property tax, but it only delays the inevitable, as well as maintains the liability for taxpayers. If you don't pay your property tax, your property is seized by the state. If you don't pay your income tax, you can go to jail. This is a great system that allows we the people, to decide how we pay our taxes with new goods and services. I believe Wyoming and Kansas are also adopting similar legislation, as we see what Senator Ehrman, Senator Howard, other senators have proposed. This is a great system to really nuke the tax system we have with a solid answer. So I look forward to being part of the team that gets this in. Something I would propose, actually, is a tax cap on that 7.5% for the EPIC option. I think we don't need to go higher. And then let's cut spending. So that's next.
And finally, Michelle Smith on taxes.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Paul has some really good ideas, and my motto is a balanced approach. So thank you for sharing that, because that's definitely where I stand as far as tax reform goes. I am the voice for vulnerable Nebraskans and for all Nebraskans. We need our public school systems. We need police officers. We need roads to drive on. We've got some rain and potentially snow coming in. We need people to clear our roads for us. So I also agree with what Paul said, that tax structure is a three-legged stool. I'll talk a little bit more about that. That one leg is sales tax, one leg is property taxes, and one leg is income taxes. So as far as tax structure goes, we must have a balance between all three of those. EPIC has been mentioned. What that does is cuts off two legs of the stool. And what happens with that? The stool falls over and our society collapses. So we need a balanced approach to address our systems here in Nebraskans, to make sure that our people here in Nebraska has everything that we need. Again, we need schools, we need roads to drive on, and we need to have police, jails, all of the systems. Thank you much.
And our next question, this time we will start with Paul Hamelink. And our question is, how will you promote rural economic development? And what challenges do you see as obstacles hindering economic development and growth?
Economic development in our rural areas, and this is a largely rural district. Phelps County is entirely rural, of course, Kearney County, and then we have a lot of rural areas in Adams County. So one of the things we have to focus on is infrastructure, and that includes things like broadband access. We need to not just keep agriculture strong, we need to grow agriculture, and Nebraska ought to be a prime state to do it. So we need a tax structure that's going to favor businesses and business growth. We need to make sure that we have a tax structure that fosters and protects our ag industry. We need to look for ways to use public funds to be a catalyst or to catalyze economic development. So there are opportunities for our city here to use, for example, LB80 funds in order to spur economic growth. So at the state level, we need to keep our infrastructure strong, need to make sure we get the support and incentivize our rural development so that we can grow agriculture in our rural areas and use the resources that we have. University of Nebraska is a prime example. Let's use those kinds of resources to get into our rural areas and promote the economic growth there. We have tremendous opportunity in our rural areas, and we need to take advantage of it. And so that's where, at the state level, making sure that we fight hard for District 33, so that we don't get into a situation where everything goes to the east side of the state. We need to keep it here in rural Nebraska.
And Joshua Frederick, rural economic development.
The only way rural areas are going to develop is if we do it. You know, that includes housing, that includes agriculture. The thing that's stopping this from happening is the state government, is local government. We need less regulation. We need less tax burdens. This needs to be an industrial revolution 2.0 where go wild. Build what you need to build, farm what you need to farm. Just absolutely as much tax cuts as we can possibly do, as much business and labor regulations as we possibly can do. It's burdensome. It chokes Nebraskans in general. I may actually be the only one who lives in a rural area on the stage here. I only get 25 megabytes per second for rural internet speeds. I'm pretty okay with that. But yeah, there needs to be drive of innovation. The way we do it is not government regulation or government stimulus. It's individual entrepreneurship and investments, whatever the case may be, needs to be on the individual level. We don't need it from the government. It's also not their responsibility. So I think I'll cut that short. We can continue.
And Michelle Smith, rural economic development.
Yeah, my son is currently at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. He's double majoring in high school physics and secondary education to be a high school physics teacher. Part of economic development is ensuring our communities are places that our children, our grandchildren want to come home to. We want our children to come back after going to college or to stay here to go to college. My alma mater is Hastings College. UNK is expanding their education programs. So we really need to depend and rely on our local colleges, our universities, Central Community College, in order to provide the education of the people here in District 33. We need our neighbors to be trained, our neighbors to be our plumbers, our electricians, our mental health therapists, our doctors, our lawyers. We need our people to come back and to want to stay here in rural Nebraska. We need our farmers here. We need all of these young people standing in the room, sitting in the room, to want to stay in rural Nebraska because it is the place to be. It is the place we want to work, we want to live, we want to raise a family, and that is a key to economic development and addressing the workforce shortage here in District 33.
And finally, wrapping up this question on economic development, we go to Dan Lanowski.
Thank you. Josh, for the last 17 years, I've lived south of Hastings on a little 3-acre plot. So just so you know, to develop Nebraska, we've got to develop our ag. We are an agricultural state. If we can take care of our agriculture, everything else will fall in around that. As well as we've got to take care of our schools. We pay our taxes into public schools, so we need to make sure that those schools are in line with what we're trying to teach them. We've got to develop the small businesses. We've got to make sure small business owners can stay open in Nebraska so that they're not being bought out. We've got to make sure our ag land remains within the family and that those acres are not being bought by Bill Gates and Ted Turner and large companies or other countries. In order to do that, we do have to keep our decision-making and our governing at the lowest level possible. We want to make those decisions as low as we can because what's good for Adams County, what's good for Kearney County, might not be good for Lancaster County. It might not be good for Butler County. So if we can make those decisions happen at our level, we'll be a lot better off.
And our next question will be starting with Joshua Frederick. As you know, if you're elected to the legislature, you'll be one of 49. Much of the work happens within committees. Which legislative committees would you request and why?
Yeah, I would like to be part of the Veterans Military Committee and the Labor and Business Committee. The reason for Veterans Military Committee is I'm a U.S. Army vet. I have a unique perspective of how corrupt our military is becoming with a radical liberal agenda behind it. You know, I experienced First Amendment persecution for what I believe. I think we owe to service members who were wrongfully terminated, 8,400 plus, for standing up for their First Amendment rights. I'd like to see reparations. I'd like to see protections in the future for service members, specifically National Guardsmen, Nebraska, active duty reserves. They do not need to compromise on their First Amendment freedoms in order to serve their country. That's something I was told is woefully wrong. The second is labor and business. We need to cut regulation like crazy. Like I said, the second industrial revolution will happen here in Nebraska with the EPIC option if we terminate the strings that are attached and tie the hands of business owners, farmers, ranchers, you name it. We must. Otherwise, there's no end in sight with the tax increases that we have just with inflation. It's a continual rise. So, I'd take any other committee that's recommended. I've got a unique perspective being 27 years old. We need adequate representation for Nebraska. That includes the next generation of enabling. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes, but those are the top two.
Legislative committees will now take the question to this end with Michelle Smith.
Thank you. Yes, as a mental health therapist, my number one choice is the Health and Human Services Committee. We need to work on maintaining the proper funding for our services here in rural Nebraska. I also am interested in the Judiciary Committee. I worked at the YRTC in Geneva for several years, and I know firsthand, I was in the trenches with, again, our most vulnerable Nebraskans, the children, the teenagers who were in the criminal justice system and were sent away from their homes and their families to receive the treatment that they needed. And we need to make sure that there's services available for our youth so they don't end up going to prison. You know, I saw the recidivism and the progress where kids went from the YRTC in Geneva, and then unfortunately some of them went down the road to York, just down the highway. And so I'm dedicated and committed to making sure that our children, I work with from age 0 plus, and those are the times in the critical stages where we can make the most difference. And I want to make sure that in the legislature, we're supporting evidence-based practices for our women, our children, our families, and I'm out of time.
Thank you, Michelle. Now moving on to Dan Lanowski. What legislative committees would you request and why?
I would love to work with the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee and the Education Committee. So military affairs, I mentioned that I've been to Afghanistan. I've served 36 years. What I didn't tell you is that I have a son that's is in the U.S. military right now, and he's a sniper. And his time in Afghanistan was different than mine. But even now as he serves, there are different classes that he's required to take that have absolutely nothing to do with military service. When Josh says there's some things going on in our military, the U.S. government is using our military as a microcosm to see how it'll work with society. It's just not right. It's not good. My son has decided that he wants to stay in, and he's going to serve his 20 years, and my hat's off to him for that. Veterans Affairs, we need to take care of our veterans. There are a lot of veterans out there. They don't know who to reach out to. They're close to the end of time, and they don't know where to go to get their funeral plot or their coffin or their rights or their flag that would be draped over their coffin. So we have to do something to reach out to them. There's a lot of our veterans that were not brought up on computers, so we have to help them get there. Education Committee, I'm conservative, and I've had a lot of arguments in the hallways with some of our teachers, and so I want to make sure we keep Nebraska schools right.
And finally, the question on committees goes to Paul Hamelink.
This is an easy one for me. My passions and my focus are on two things: Taxes, Revenue Committee, got to be there. We have to take care of taxes. 2, Economic Development. I want to be on the Appropriations Committee. I want to make sure we control government spending and make sure that we're involved in those kinds of issues. So those are easy picks for me. Now, my PhD work was administration and policy in higher education. So education would probably be a good fit. And nobody said it. They must not know this crowd. Agriculture, I mean, this is the Farm Bureau meeting. Thanks, guys. Now, I would serve you well. I think some of my skills might be better served in there. And I would do a great job on the Ag Committee, friends. Trust me, I'll work hard there. But we've got to work on taxes. We've got to work on economic development. And when I say economic development, really 3 things I hear all the time. Number 1 is workforce. So we have to make it easy for people to work in Nebraska. We've got military people. I appreciate their service. You know, you can be an electrician in the military, but you can't be in Nebraska without going through all the hoops. We can fix that. You can be a teacher in another state, but it's really hard to get that reciprocity here. We can fix that. And so the second thing is, of course, housing, and that's what I do. I work for the National Center for Housing Management. I've been a senior consultant and trainer, trained people all across America. I've trained the HUD office in Kansas City. We need to fix housing and affordable child care. We've got to provide affordable child care to be economically strong.
I appreciate your answers to those questions, candidates. Now we're going to move on to our next question. This time, Michelle Smith will be starting. And thank you, Mr. Hamelink, for the setup on this, because what ideas do you have for developing more child care opportunities? We're going to stick with that theme. How can we develop more child care opportunities for working parents in District 33?
Thank you. Yes, childcare is definitely needed for our working families. As I've been knocking almost 2,500 doors on the campaign trail, I have definitely heard that as a common concern, that a lot of women and families can't afford childcare. I met with one family, and though it wasn't feasible, she was actually a child care provider herself, and she couldn't afford child care for her own child. So I definitely support Senator Frederickson's bill that's in our legislature currently, that we want to ensure that our child care providers are receiving that child care themselves. That way they can provide that child care for others. We also want to look at our schools. I know there are some rural communities where schools help to provide that. We also, again, need to look at education and making sure that our individuals are being trained to provide child care options. Again, with mental health care, there's a lot of kids who are actually kicked out of child care placements. And that's not okay. So we need quality trained professionals who are providing that child care. Thank you.
And moving along with the same question, we'll continue on down the line to Dan Lanowski, child care opportunities.
Well, this is one that hits for home. I've got a son that's a teacher, and his wife is a dental hygienist, and they have to drop their 2 kids off. And so every day she drops them off, she's paying a bill. Now the trick is, even on the day she's at home, she's still paying child care services. Even in the summer, if my son is at home, they're paying to retain the child care services. And I don't know when that changed. I don't know how that changed. And I guess if that child care provider wants to charge you to reserve your spot, they have that right. We need some sort of tax refund and tax rebates for these people that are sending their kids all the time. One of the things that public schools have done, they have added preschool for 3-year-olds. Now that certainly helps. At least now, instead of 5 years old, a lot of people can send their 3-year-old to a half day, or even some of them are full day, and that helps. Otherwise, it's a lot more complex issue that we'll need to address when we get there. Thank you.
All right, continuing with our question on child care opportunities, we move to Paul Hamelink.
I've been involved in child care as senior living administrator for the largest senior community in Nebraska. You don't think seniors and child care go together, but we had 385 employees. So we had and operated, and I was responsible for the largest daycare in this district, serving over 200 families every week. It's a real problem, and affordability is the issue. And so there are things that we have to do. Number one, stop government regulation. We're over-regulating that industry. I talked to a daycare owner recently in Hastings. They have to do changes for active shooters. Now, daycares are very safe places. I get they need to have security, but it's at a cost of $30,000 to that daycare. What small business could absorb that? Daycares work on very small margins. There are moves in the legislature, for example, to provide for subsidy so that daycare workers don't have to pay for daycare while they're providing daycare. So that we can do that. It's a great idea. We have to be creative. Norfolk has gotten together and in the Columbus area to create a nonprofit that does all the back office work for daycares so that you could operate a smaller daycare in your home and not have to worry about filling out all the paperwork, taking care of the HR stuff, meeting all the regulations that the state puts on you. All of that can be handled in a collective manner for a bunch of daycares, saving a lot of money and making daycare a lot affordable. So we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to control government regulation, and we have to find some ways to make it affordable for families.
And child care, finally, we'll round out this question with Joshua Frederick.
Yeah, I completely agree. We need to deregulate child care. We need to deregulate Nebraska. One of the biggest crutches for child care systems, unfortunately, is how much government is involved. Subsidies, however, are not the answer. With subsidies comes higher taxes and higher tax burden for everyone else. The best answer for this is free market. If there's a demand, there will be a supply because people will make money off of it. I'm an architectural designer and construction manager. We just designed a child care center in southeast Nebraska. The answer for just about every single of these housing problem, child care problems, is let Nebraskans do what they do best and create industry. Let them be innovative. And yeah, let's cut the ropes around their hands with deregulation. So I'll be quick.
All right, and we're moving on to our next question, and this time we will start with Dan Lanowski. And how can livestock production fit into economic development in District 33?
Well, we've done a lot with livestock production in the last decade and the increased pasture lands. Agriculture is our backbone. We have got to make sure that our ranchers and our cattle owners continue to thrive and to continue to raise up the cattle. We're a beef industry. We sell a lot of our beef to other states, and we need to ensure that Lincoln thinks about the cattle owners and the ranchers and not just about the urban development, but thinks about our people out here when it comes to raising our cattle and raising beef.
All right, and Mr. Hemmelink,
Sure,
livestock production as economic development.
Thank you. Economic development, again, is my critical issue. 2 weeks ago, at this very moment, Thursday, 2 weeks ago, I was sitting with one of the largest beef producers in north central Nebraska talking about these exact issues. And what we need to do, we're at a 100-year low in terms of the number of head of cattle we have in Nebraska right now. 3-year drought, very high hay prices. We're talking about some real challenges that they're facing and people are simply getting out of. Now, it's cyclical. It'll come back. So we have to find ways to do it. So this is where the state can come in. The Department of Economic Development can find new and bigger markets for our products. We have the only beef packing house in the nation that exports kosher beef to Israel. Where is it? Hastings, Nebraska. Those are things that we can do at the state level to make sure that we open up our markets, keep them strong. Our exports for beef ought to be going around the world. We got the best beef in the world, all right? And if you don't like a good ribeye, I'll fix that. So we have to show that we can open up those markets, keep them strong, make sure that we support, again, keep regulation out of the beef industry, and facilitate even more growth in what we do through our great beef industry here in Nebraska.
And moving on to Mr. Frederick, livestock production as economic development.
Yep, beef is the largest commodity in Nebraska. It's vital to our infrastructure. One of the worst things that happens with generational farms and ranches is the owners grow old, die out, and what's left is half of a property because of inheritance tax theft, and then the property taxes are too much for the children to take care of, so that gets sold, divvied up, probably to Bill Gates or Ted Turner. And what are they doing with their farmland? They're following the ESG curriculum, and they're not farming, and they're not producing beef. So that cuts directly against what the foundation of Nebraska is. There's other policy coming from the federal level, like the Green New Deal and similar ones, that would choke Nebraskans from farming and ranching. It's abysmal. There's a pseudoscience with this climate change. Yes, the climate changes. It's very windy today, and it rained. But we don't need to continually regulate any business, whether it's ranchers, farmers, on these kind of environmental falsehoods. So, yeah, that's my answer.
And rounding out our questions, livestock development as economic development, Michelle Smith.
Thank you. Again, I'm the voice for Nebraskans. The people of Nebraska and the people of District 33 need to be and provide input. They are the stewards of agriculture. So I plan to speak with the farmers in District 33 to get their input. I want to have regular town halls to have communication with the people of District 33. You guys here in this room are the most important people who can truly answer this question. I can give lots of ideas. I also agree with Paul that trade is very important. You know, we have to be able to trade with other countries. We have to address how to trade openly with all countries, whether that's continuing trade with countries like China, Mexico, those types of things. We also need to look at local programs such as farm-to-table programs and farm-to-school programs that will help build the beef production and livestock production here in rural Nebraska. Thank you.
And we're going to stay on the theme of the Nebraska's Golden Triangle, livestock, along with our corn and ethanol production, certainly create that Golden Triangle. So we're going to talk about the ethanol component of that. And we're going to start this time with, let's see, where are we at? Paul Hamelink. Do you support construction of carbon dioxide pipelines to help with renewable fuel production?
Yes, I support renewable fuels in the state of Nebraska. I'm grateful that we got through the legislature last year the mandate to carry E15 that helps not only our corn producers but our ethanol producers as well. 2 large ethanol operations right here in District 33 with Chief Industries, and here not far away, just up the road on Highway 6. And so we've got to be able to make sure that we keep, and we're developing a large biodiesel plant on the east side of Hastings as well. We need to keep those industries strong and help to grow them. It helps all parts of agriculture. And so that's where I think if whatever we can do, that makes sense to both our economies and to help our producers. Those are things, and it's a growing sector, and we're going to see even more development there. And so these are things I've been in conversations with our renewable fuels folks to make sure that we keep those industries strong here in District 33 and across Nebraska, because it really trickles down into all the levels of agriculture, because we make ethanol out of corn, and we're going to make biofuels out of soybeans. So making sure that we facilitate what's necessary to keep those industries strong is going to work well for Nebraska.
And Joshua Frederick, do you support construction of carbon dioxide pipelines to help renewable fuel production?
Yep, free market capitalism is fantastic. If there's a byproduct to be made money with, absolutely go for it, go crazy. You know, creative innovation is one of the best things. That's how we got what used to be copper. Now we have broadband. I lost it. Anyway, yeah, absolutely. Rock and roll on free market, and don't let the government hang you up. Keep going. That's it.
Okay. We're coming along to this side, Michelle Smith. Do you support construction of carbon dioxide pipelines for ethanol plants?
I definitely support ethanol production and use in the state of Nebraska. I think that's a piece of economic development. The piece that I do not support is when the land is taken away from the farmers here in rural Nebraska. It is not acceptable for the government to come in and say, we are going to take your land to put a pipeline in place. I come from both sides of my families being farmers. My mom's side of the family grew up in Lawrence, and my dad's side of the family grew up in Shelton, Nebraska. And it is appalling to think of the thought of having the government come in and take away any of my family's land. So I will be the voice for Nebraskans to make sure that we support economic development while also making sure that the family farms stay in the family for generations to come.
And we're going to round out this question. Support of construction. Do you support construction of carbon dioxide pipelines? Dan Lanowski.
Yes, I do. First, I'd like to go back to that livestock production real quick. My experience with agriculture was this. That question really should have been asked of these FFA kids because they are the future of our livestock production and of our agriculture. Ethanol plants, Nebraska is like the capital of the ethanol industry in the nation. Our renewable energies are extremely important. And it's not only the ethanol. We need to become more efficient at it so it doesn't require as much subsidy. We also have Brownville nuclear power plant. We need to make sure that it remains efficient and that we can continue to use that. Our wind energy and our solar energy at this point, they're not nearly as efficient as they need to be. So we need to continue research on all of our renewable energy resources so that we can just become better off with using them.
And moving on to our next question. This round we will begin, let me check my notes again, with Joshua Frederick. How will you build consensus within the legislature in order to get things done? Let me repeat that. How will you build consensus within the legislature in order to get things done?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of good conservative Republican senators over in Lincoln. You know, it's going to be hard to get consensus with everybody. Certainly with no compromise issues like pro-life, that's going to be a fight from day one. And it has been in Nebraska. We had an unfortunate compromise with the Let Them Grow Act, where the 12-week abortion ban was enacted as a compromise to the 6 weeks. I would like to see 0 abortions in Nebraska. That's not a compromise issue. Consensus will never be reached on this topic. So, yes, I will find consensus in issues that we can compromise on. Taxes are something to compromise on, and you know, I'd like to see property tax removed, but there's not a tax cut I wouldn't sign. There's not a pro-life bill I wouldn't sign, but the end goal, 0 abortions in Nebraska. So there's a lot of like-minded individuals. There's a lot of people who are staunchly against this, but you got to come to the debate stage with your values, you know, your Christ-centered values. You got to come to Lincoln and say, no, this is an immoral issue. We're gonna remove it. I think God will honor our state if we get abortions down to 0. So.
And moving on to this side, Michelle Smith, how will you build consensus?
A house divided will not stand. Those were the words of Abraham Lincoln in the 1800s during the Civil War. And those words still ring true today. We are divided as a nation. We are divided as a state. That was seen in the 2023 legislative session, and that is not okay. That is not acceptable. My experience as a mental health therapist, as an adjunct college professor, sets me up beautifully to bring people together. That's literally my job, is to build respect, communication, listening to each other, to be able to work together, come together on these issues that are so deep and so serious that affects all 2 million of us. And we need to come together, work together, and come up with common sense solutions to all of these issues facing Nebraskans today. And it would be my honor to be that person, to serve as the next state senator in District 33.
Dan Lanowski, how will you go about building consensus within the legislature?
Okay, so I am also pro-life, so I would probably arm wrestle you about who the most pro-life guy is, Josh. But I remember in 1973 when Roe v. Wade was passed, how my mother cried. So I would never, ever give on that issue. As an educator, what I really want to do is I want to get people to believe my side. I want to convince them. I don't want to defeat them. I want them to see where I'm coming from. So when we talk about working across the aisle, I want to make people see what it is I see. I want them to stand in my boots. I want to be able to stand in their shoes and try to understand their issues. Obviously, there are some issues. There are some some different types of structures here that we have to reach across the aisle and work on. And obviously there's others that we absolutely could not.
And finally, we'll close out this question with Paul Hamelink. How will you build consensus within the legislature?
A couple of weeks ago, Congressman Mike Flood came to do my fundraiser and endorse my campaign. One of the things he talked about was my ability, because again, I've been there, I've done that. I've had to serve on city councils and deal with multiple views and work with other lawmakers to do that. And I can tell you that the ability starts with gaining trust, going to the legislature and gaining the trust of your colleagues, showing them that you can work with them, work alongside them, and even though you disagree. And yes, I'll state, I may not be the most pro-life in the room. I'm the most pro-life at this table. However, I've been an evangelical minister ordained for many decades. No compromise on that. No compromise on the social issues. But we have to work together, and it all starts with trust. It begins with being able to come alongside them, and even though you disagree, if you gain their trust and they know that your commitment, there are so many issues that we can work together with for the good of all Nebraskans. And as we talk about the critically important issues we face, like our taxes, like economic development, like our workforce and affordable child care, housing, which is in a critical shortage right now, those are things absolutely we have to, those are bipartisan issues that we have to focus on and come together on, and not let what divides us keep us from the successes we need to have.
Very good. Now moving on to our next line of questioning. This time we will be back with, let's see, Michelle, won't we? Certain areas of the state have concerns with both groundwater quality and quantity. What role does the state play when it comes to groundwater quality and quantity?
Thank you. Yes, the groundwater quality is definitely on the forefront of, I'm sure, a lot of us, most of us in this room. We have to address the level of nitrates with common sense solutions here in District 33. Our groundwater quality is suffering. That's impacting our people. Coming back to being a therapist, I have worked with families whose children have had brain tumors. Unfortunately, some of those children have died. Our people here in rural Nebraska need to address the nitrates so we can build and grow and develop and keep our community safe. I am the voice for vulnerable Nebraskans. I support Senator Ibaugh's bill that is currently in the legislature that provides incentives for our rural farmers, because all of you in this room, especially the farmers, are the stewards of our land. Senator Ibaugh's bill gives incentives to install reverse osmosis systems on your farm. It gives you a tax rebate back. So you don't pay as much taxes to make that investment to keep your family safe. And that is the core of what I do. I keep the people I care about safe. Thank you.
And Dan Lanowski, how would you have the state address issues of groundwater quality and quantity?
So I think the key is education and communication. We need to work with our farmers. We need to make sure they know down to the very detail exactly how much nitrate they can use in their land when they're growing their crops. If we can educate them, then we can kind of supervise. And by that, I mean we want to make sure that at the lowest level we have someone that's ensuring that that water is remaining safe for drinking, and that water is safe, potable water. Will be just fine. There's a lot of different areas, and where I live is included. Our nitrate level is over 10, so we have to put in a special drinking system, which I'm pretty sure probably everyone that's on a well that lives outside of their community is probably the same. We just need to make sure that farmers know exactly what is permitted on their land and where. And it's different in different types of soil. It's different in different parts of the state. So the education has got to remain at that level.
And Paul Hamelink, what role should the state play when it comes to groundwater quality and quantity?
The state of Nebraska, just the way it's set up, owns the water. But I want to tell you something. Nobody cares more about the water or the land, for that matter, than our farmers. They depend on it, and they care. And so I think what needs to happen is to work with farmers. We've got great technologies these days, both in terms of monitoring quality and the ways that we use agricultural products that might affect water quality, and the use of water conservation techniques. It is amazing what technology can do. We need to foster that. That needs to be something that we help farmers with. I know that it's free market. We don't. It's been said we don't like subsidies. Farmers get a lot of subsidies, and I think when we can assist them, because I don't like unfunded mandates from the government. So that's where, when we're talking about state owns the water, the state has a responsibility to help our agricultural producers work with that. And again, these folks care. They're the ones who want to do it, and they're the ones who out there every day, day in and out, are using it and working with it. And that's where we're not enemies, we're partners in this. So regulation, again, needs to be common sense. If there are pushed out mandates, they need to be funded so that we can make sure that what we're doing is not tying the hands of our producers, but enabling to do what they do even better.
And Joshua Frederick, what role do you see the state playing with groundwater quality and quantity?
Yeah, first of all, so that House Divided quote was actually Lincoln quoting scripture. So just wanted to point that out. But yeah, so the state owns water supply, and yeah, it's a little bit of a duty to protect water rights and water consumption, as well as preservation of the quality of water. You know, you own your property. It's dependent on your neighbor to not deprive you of your rights as well. So there's a little bit of balance between, farmers and residential, for the sake of not destroying wells, whatever the case may be, with poison in water. So I see property rights as one of the biggest ways on the individual level. You know, farmers love their resource, the Oakwell Aquifer. I think there's potential for a canal to be built to offset some of the deprivation of the aquifer over in western Nebraska, so we could look at those options as well.
All right, we'll be moving on to the next line of questioning. This time we will start with Dan Lanowski. And Dan, our question is going to be, do you support hard caps on local governments in an effort to control spending? This would include things like schools, counties, etc. Do you support hard caps on local government spending?
I certainly do support a cap on local spending, and I support a cap on our federal government too, because if we can put a limit on how much we're spending, we would have a better idea of what we're going to be needing for the next year. But locally, we need to have those hard caps. Obviously, if you have a fund where emergencies come up, where a tornado might take out a school or something, you'd be able to use that excess fund. But outside of anything like that, I certainly support capping how much is allowed to each district, each school, each area.
And Paul Hamelink, hard caps.
Again, one of my issues is local control. We need to keep things under local control. If the state imposed caps, which I'm not opposed to, but I have some reservations about it, it takes away local control. It is, in effect, the legislature saying, we don't trust your local school board, your local county board, and your local city council, whatever political subdivision, we don't trust them, we're going to impose it upon them. I believe in local control. That being said, there are some things we need to consider as well. One size doesn't fit all. Remember, if a legislature enacts a cap, that's Omaha as well as Minden. I think most of you recognize they're not the same, and the issues are different there. Omaha Public Schools and Minden Public Schools, somewhat different there. So we have to be careful about a one-size-all approach. Secondly, it won't work. I will tell you, I came from a city when I moved to Nebraska from Wisconsin, where they said, you don't want to pay property tax, great. We won't fund the fire department through taxes. So what did they do? They put a fee on my water bill. So they took care of property taxes, but I still ended up paying because all of us every month on our water bill had a fire. So there's always a workaround. So you're going to see moves from going to tax-supported to fee-supported. So we have to be careful what you wish for. The other things that we have to think about, so let me wind up with, if there's a possibility for override on the part of voters, then perhaps yes. And so we, of course, have caps in place already. So we just need to be careful about how we do it.
All right, moving along. Joshua Frederick, do you support hard caps on local government to control spending?
Yeah, 100% hard caps as well as hard caps on percentages. You know, one of the ways we can solve this is with the EPIC option reform. This would create a viable way for schools, for county commissioners to send up their budget so they could receive the necessary funding within I believe, 5% of what, lost it. Anyway, so something else that needs to happen is audits. During the fiscal year, people towards the end, they push use it or lose it mentalities. You've got a budget. If you don't use the amount, then you lose it next fiscal term. So there needs to be audits for overspending and waste, and that's going to cut down on the necessary budget size that schools or governments in local areas use. So I would also be in favor of an override option for the people so they can keep local control.
And Michelle Smith, do you support hard caps on local governments to control spending?
No, state government should not dictate how local school districts spend their money. I met with a school board member, and she had that perspective. She did not like when the state legislature had all of their Christmas tree bills, and they were left struggling to figure out how to accommodate all of those bills that were lumped together in one bill. She didn't like some of those bills, and she said, I don't like this. I don't want to do this, but our local schools had to do it because the state of Nebraska dictated to our local community what we had to do. And that's not okay. That's not the role of our state government to dictate to Minden Public Schools, to Hastings Public Schools, to Adams Central Public Schools. It's not okay for the state government to dictate how the property tax money and other tax money is being spent. That is up to local control. It's up to the school boards who know the people in the community. It's up to the voters in the community. It's up to the parents of the children to decide how they want to spend the resources and the financial abilities to the best of their ability and the decision making for the best interest of the children who are the vulnerable Nebraskans.
All right, I'm just going to let folks know we have time for just a couple more questions, and then we will get to the lightning round. So a couple more things to go. We want to talk about our young people in the state, and I ask this as a parent of some young people myself who hopefully are getting in bed and brushing their teeth and saying their prayers about now. But also we have some young people in our audience. I met Spencer, is that right, at the Franklin County Fair, a young man. Are you guys from Minden in this row here? A young man from the Minden FFA chapter, and I believe he's a state officer now. Is that right? You guys have a state officer? So I guess I hang around with the right kids, I guess. But for all of these young people, what can we do to keep young, educated people from leaving Nebraska and provide opportunities to prevent the brain drain? And we are going to start this time with Paul Hamelink.
Mike Flood talks a lot about this. If you haven't read his book and what they're doing in his plan for that area, it's wonderful. What we need to do is create a standard of living, a quality of life that keeps our young people here. There's an allure to go to the big city. There's an allure to go kind of explore the world. But when they realize the good life we have here in Nebraska, the opportunities we have for them, and a quality of life that works for them, that is an important issue. We need to make sure that our farm kids can get their stay in the farm and the family. So we need to, of course, do away with the inheritance tax and make it easy for those farms to become passed down to further generations. Keep our farm kids here in the farm doing it. And there are ways that we can look to provide for them housing, make sure they've got things like the affordable child care and opportunities here in Nebraska. With my final moment, I'm going to return to the tax caps because there's two things you need to know that I will do. A couple of things that I do favor are we need to have a rollback in the mill rate when there's an assessment increase. So when there's an assessment goes up 30%, there shouldn't automatically be a 30% increase in the budgets that are used by our schools, cities, counties, and so on. So we need to roll back mill rates when assessments goes up, and be careful about caps because they become a goal. If you put a cap on, everybody budgets the entire cap every time. You'd be crazy not to.
All right, brain drain. We're going to continue on down. Joshua Frederick.
So I've got a unique perspective here. I actually joined the U.S. Army out of college and was stationed in Fort Stewart, Georgia. I was educated at UNL, came back to the state. I'm actually counter to the brain drain. One of the things that attracted me to the state is I have a genuine love for the state. I have family here, but it was not an equitable decision. In Georgia, the cost of living is quite a bit lower. Nebraska is one of the heaviest taxed states in our country. We need to completely deregulate this state of the massive tax burdens. That's going to bring people back who otherwise would choose not to. There was a story of I think a nuclear engineer who cannot by any means fathom a reason to come from Texas where he's working and making a lot of money to Nebraska where he would. It's just devastating. There's plenty of stories like this, but biggest thing is, cut regulation. It's going to drive business to return. A lot of people are moving their businesses to less tax regulated states such as Florida or Texas. Let's return to Nebraska. Let's deregulate as much as we can. It's going to encourage people to come back. I think also the quality of education is necessary in our universities. There's a reason kids are interested in going to bigger cities. It might have to do with liberal indoctrination in our colleges, in our state public schools, whatever the case may be. They're being indoctrinated to want to move to these big cities as opposed to the conservative way of life, which generally is in the rural area.
Preventing the brain drain. Michelle will come on to this end.
This is definitely at my heart. I mentioned my son who's off at UNO, and I often have this conversation with him. He's torn between staying in Omaha, Nebraska, and coming back to teach at St. Cecilia, where he graduated from as a high school physics teacher. So it's definitely in my heart to make Hastings and District 33 a place that he wants to come home to. I think part of that is keeping Nebraska the good life. To be the place with our common sense values, the values I was born and raised with, the values that all of you were born and raised with. We need compassion, hard work, dedication to the people to make our communities places and keep our communities places where our kids want to come back and they want to stay to go to college. You don't have to leave District 33 to go to college. We have excellent education here in the district. Hastings College is my alma mater. I got an amazing education with professors who are still supporting me, who I still have a relationship with to this day in Hastings College. We have Central Community College where our youth can go to school. We can make sure that our communities have activities for our youth to participate in. We can make sure it's a place where our families can receive quality education and want to raise their children.
All right, and that leaves one individual left to answer in this, Dan Lanowski, preventing the brain drain.
I don't know what to say. All 5 of my children who are working out in the workforce live within an hour of my house or an hour and a half of my house. So my wife and I must have done something right. Certainly, Christian values, conservative values plays a key role here. Economic growth, economic opportunities, job opportunities, and property taxes being low are some of the things that will help keep kids here. We have got to make sure that we have more opportunities for our kids, whether they're graduating from UNK or UNL or Hastings College, or whether they're leaving high school and going right into the workforce. There's a lot of good jobs out there. We've got to make sure it's affordable living and a fair wage for those people.
All right, we've come down to our final question of the Q&A time. After this, I will let you know we will be doing the lightning round, followed by closing remarks. So we left off Paul led off the last time. That means Joshua will start on the final round of questioning. And the question is, what is your vision on the future of power generation and distribution in Nebraska that will allow for economic growth?
Yep, power distribution needs to be affordable and available. We cannot have stuff like the Green New Deal or pseudoscience from climate change dictate how our infrastructure is developed. how it costs and how it's made available to Nebraskans. If we just all of a sudden remove fossil fuels or energy that's pivotal to our infrastructure and go to a less reliable system of wind and electric, solar, whatever the case may be, those are great options. They're not there yet. There's a lot of stigma that comes to nuclear power. I think we need to open the door and reevaluate. A lot of people grew up in the 70s and Chernobyl was terrible, but there's opportunity now, quite a few years later, to make this a sustainable and a good, solid source of renewable energy. So we need to allow for the free market capitalism to go wild, create sustainable energy to, do what they do best. Let's deregulate and let people create new forms of energy that are, pretty solid.
Michelle Smith, power generation in Nebraska.
We definitely need a wide variety of sources of fuel to reduce our reliance on foreign sources. We obviously have an opportunity here in Nebraska to be a leader in the United States of America. That promotes our economic development, that supports our farmers. It gives another increase, another form of income into the home. And those are things that will build us, and it impacts us for generations to come. Our children can rely on those renewable energy sources. So we need to invest in those now to give us extra income, to grow our economies, and again, to bring the people who are born and raised here, to make them want to stay here in District 33.
Dan Lanowski, what's your vision for the future of power generation and distribution?
I really think this is a common sense issue. For example, electric vehicles. To charge your electric vehicle, you've got to pull up to a plant that is providing energy with coal. And so you need coal in order to support your electric vehicle. The lithium batteries, there's nowhere to throw them away. They don't dissolve. They don't go away. So there's also a problem with that part of it. We have wind energy. We've got to become more efficient with that. We have solar energy. There's some issues with that, and we've got to become more efficient. Nuclear energy, nuclear power plants, we just have to make sure that they're safe and they're sound. And, of course, ethanol, as I said before, that's kind of the backbone of what Nebraska's about as far as renewable energy source. We just have to keep researching, and we have to keep studying, and we have to keep improving what we have.
And Paul Hameling, power generation in Nebraska.
Of course, as the city council president in Hastings, we owned our utilities, built probably the last coal-fired power plant that will ever be built in America. It idles. It never gets up to half speed. We have it available. And energy needs to be two things, reliable and affordable. But we also live in a world that's bigger than Nebraska. And so some of the things that we had to address and need to be addressed, if we want economic growth, there are companies, if they locate in Nebraska, and whether I agree with their position or not is not necessarily my choice, but they insist on a certain amount of energy that is produced being renewable energies. So we built a solar farm in Hastings. I've done it. We need to develop these things to be able to attract those businesses that look on for those kinds of things. And so renewable energies are important. I like to see the ability of individuals producing their own energy. So solar arrays on a farm, why not? We need to make sure the regulations don't prevent that, and the government doesn't get in the way. The power grid is the most complicated system the human race has ever created. We need to protect it, make it reliable, make sure there are a lot of redundancies, because again, when you turn the switch, the lights need to go on, and it needs to be affordable.
All right, thank you, candidates. Now we move on to the lightning round. These will be questions that you will need to give a yes-no answer, or for or against would be an appropriate response, perhaps. And we'll give you about 10 seconds to pontificate, but we want to keep these pretty simple and get through a number of these. So let's see. The last time we started with Joshua. So, Michelle, we'll start with you. The Let Them Grow Act. Yes, no, for, against.
Sorry. Yes, no, for, against is a challenging response to such a complicated question.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to move on that one. Sorry, we've got to keep these quick. Maybe you'll have time to address that later. Mr. Lanowski.
Do I get that question?
Yes, we're going to let you answer the same one there.
Let them grow act. In my mind, that was a beautiful law. And there's a couple reasons why. When you have teachers that are making decisions on whether or not a kid should go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to decide if they should be a young man or a young woman.
Mr. Lanowski, these are 10-second responses here.
Then you should say that's not in the decision of the people.
So we're going to move on.
That's a parent decision.
Mr. Hamelink.
Support
Let
it.
them grow act.
Support it. It needs to be strengthened.
Okay. And Joshua Frederick.
100% for no genital mutilation, no cancerous hormone therapy. We're absolutely for continuing the abortion ban all the way down to 0.
All right. And we're going to start this time with Mr. Lanowski. Let's talk about EPIC. Yes, no, for, or against the EPIC tax.
We need tax reform. If we cannot find something better than EPIC, then we need to look at that and try to enact it. And
Mr. Hamelink.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of problematic issues that I can't support in that local control and where all the money goes to Lincoln, so it's not something that I can support at this time.
Joshua Frederick.
I'm absolutely for it. There's local delegates part of the bill, and for a tax cap on that, 7.5%.
And Michelle Smith.
Against.
Okay. This is, again, maybe a chance to get back kind of to the question we asked earlier, but just I'm going to ask you, do you identify as pro-life or pro-choice? And we're going to start this time with Paul Hamelink.
Absolutely pro-life. Life begins at conception.
Joshua Frederick.
Pro-life. You can see my 2-week-old right there. I hand-delivered her. There's no one more pro-life than me.
Michelle Smith.
Pro-choice.
And Dan Lanowski.
I'm pro-life, and yes, there is.
Okay. So we are going to, let's see, Joshua Frederick. We will start this time. Red flag laws, yes, no.
It's a violation of due process, 100% against. Let's also get Castle Doctrine.
Okay, Michelle Smith.
Can you ask the question again, please?
Red flag laws, are you for or against?
No opinion.
Okay. And Dan Lanowski, red flag laws.
I am for red flag laws.
Okay. And Paul Hamelink.
Against, and no opinion is an opinion.
Okay. All right. So let's see. I've got a couple more here to do. Let's do. We're just having all the fun questions that are just coming up with, like, you have no time to answer, like, these deep things that people have spent entire years of their lives working on. So I know these are tough to answer in this fashion, but we've only got a couple of minutes left. We are going to ask, let's see, and where did I leave off? Can you help me, folks? Who's began the last one? I didn't. Dan's. I think Dan did as well. Thank you. I should have kept track of this. No. You started the red flag one. Okay. We are going to ask, and this is going to be the last of our lightning rounds, but this issue of charter schools and the Opportunity Scholarships Act. Do you support the Opportunity Scholarship Act, which creates a tax credit system that helps fund kids going to private education? Private school question. You know what I'm trying to ask there. I'm not answering it very well, but do you support the use of public dollars supporting those the scholarship program that has been created?
No, my mother went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic school. My son went to Catholic school. We paid for the education and the funding.
Dan Lanowski.
Yes, I do. I think my money should go where I decide.
Okay. And Paul Hamelink.
I support school choice.
And Joshua Frederick.
Absolutely, tax dollars should follow the child for the education, 100%.
So that brings us to the end of our forum tonight. We have one last item to come. Just a reminder, if you've missed anything, you want to see anything again, you can go to the NTV website, NTV Facebook page. This has been streaming and will be available afterwards. We are now going to have a closing comments, 2 minutes for each candidate. And we're going to begin on this end with Michelle Smith, 2 minutes, closing remarks.
Again, I'm going to end with a house divided will not stand. We have to come together on the issues. If we do not come together, if we remain divided, nothing is going to be done. We're going to end up continuing to yell and scream and argue with each other. And that's not how we find common sense solutions to the problems. We find common sense solutions to the problems by coming together, working together, to find those common sense things. I will be the voice for all Nebraskans, especially the vulnerable Nebraskans. I will be the voice for the sexually abused teenager who found herself pregnant and with an STD. I will be the voice for the woman who is hemorrhaging and needs health care. I will be the voice for the couple who cannot become pregnant without IVF. If you don't know what that is, that's in vitro fertilization. I am the voice for every person in District 33. I am working hard. I am talking to people in District 33. Like I said, I have knocked almost 2,500 doors. I am making fundraising calls, but most importantly, I am listening to the people I talk to on both sides. That is who I am. I am the person who will bring us together to work hard to find common sense solutions for the people of District 33. Thank you so much for being here. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you listening to all of us. Thank you again for driving in the rain to get here, and hopefully we don't have to drive back home in the snow.
And Dan Lanowski, closing remarks.
We need experienced leaders. We need leaders that have been there. I worked in the National Guard for 36 years. I led troops in a combat zone. I've had a gun held at me and fired. I know what it's like to be under pressure. As a retired colonel, I had to make decisions in people's lives that I was not happy with. I had to relieve people from their duty because they nearly cost someone else their lives. I think I can bring my same leadership style and experience that I used as a teacher, as a high school wrestling coach, and as a colonel in the National Guard to Lincoln to get some things done to help us get God back into our schools and to help us keep a good, conservative, moral look at life.
And Paul Hamelink, closing remarks.
We do need good leaders. I appreciate a couple of my colleagues who have served in the military. I did not. Just wasn't the right time to join right after Vietnam. I have great respect for that. I think we have the greatest fighting force in the world. And what makes it so is not that our military are bigger, faster, stronger. They're the best equipped and they're the best trained. And those are the important issues. Friends, when I go to Lincoln as your senator, I go as the best equipped and the best trained person there. I've worked in the housing industry for decades. We have a critical housing shortage. I work in it every day across America and here in Nebraska. I've spent the last 2 weeks working hard with the legislature on bills affecting housing as the committee chair for policies and issues for the Nebraska Commission on Housing and Homelessness. I've dealt with issues with the city. So I've been through that line by line, through that 3-inch thick budget. The most important thing a legislature does is do that budget every year. I've had doctoral courses in finance. I've led large organizations. I have worked through city budgets. I've dealt with the Hastings Utilities budget. I've been involved in these things. We wouldn't send a soldier into battle hoping he's a quick learner. We wouldn't send somebody into a position they didn't have the training and experience to do. And I have been spent these last years not hoping to do these things, but doing them on a daily basis, being involved in economic development, creating projects that have seen growth in our area. And that's what we're going to do here, make sure that we keep Nebraska strong, keep our agricultural strong, grow it so that we can expand, and keep our young people here. We have a great state. We're going to make it better. And I go to Lincoln as the person who's not going to do it, but is going to continue doing what I've been doing for years.
And finally, closing remarks, Joshua Frederick.
You know, if you've been listening to Nebraskans, you would find they don't want their children murdered. They don't want their children taught radical transgender ideology, whether that's cancerous hormone therapy, mutilation of genitals, or the indoctrination from certain school educators or therapists of the confusion of who they are. God made them male and female. We don't need that kind of confusion. So listen to Nebraskans. Yeah, if you want a state senator who's going to be an avid protector of your Second Amendment rights, I'm your guy. I will not let red flag laws go anywhere in this state. That's a violation of your Fourth Amendment right. If you want someone who's going to push for a castle doctrine or the reinstatement of Article 1, Section 1, which protects gun ownership, which protects people to defend themselves, I'm your guy. Send me to Lincoln. I'm not going to be the guy that's going to cozy up to the radical left. I'm going to be the guy that strongly opposes them. And that's who I am. It's innate, and we need people who are strong. We need people who are the next generation. This is a conservative way of life. We each have these values and teach them to our children so that when they grow up, they can do the same for theirs. We're footstools to the next generation. If we don't enable the next generation to get involved, like the future farmers we have just here, this whole lifestyle, this whole American dream, this whole Nebraskan system that we have, it goes away. So I advise you to come talk to me afterwards. There's some cookies and coffee over at my table, I think over there as well. I appreciate your guys' time listening to me. I get to pontificate just a little bit. So fredforleg.com. Appreciate it, guys.
All right, well, this will conclude our Legislative District 33 candidate forum. Here's your chance to maybe take a deep breath and also show a round of applause for each of our candidates. We also want to offer our thanks to the Farm Bureau team for helping organize tonight's debate, as well as NTV for assistance in broadcasting and streaming this event.